Okay, I need to go into closed session to prevent the disclosure of privileged student information pursuant to NCGS 143-318.11A1 and under NCGS 115C-402 and FERPA 20 USC 1232G pursuant to NCGS 143-318.11A3 to consult with an attorney in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the public body, which privilege is hereby acknowledged, and to consider and give instructions concerning Kingsbury versus UCPS, Bertie County versus Cowell.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Good evening, everyone. I would like to call
She's
this,
saying, huh? Trying to get things.
okay, I would like to call this meeting to order. And we'll start with the approval of the agenda.
I make a motion that we approve the agenda.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, we will begin with the enrollment forecast.
Is this mic on?
Districts truly understand where they're going in the future. That might probably help if I turned it on. Yeah. Okay. Even better. Okay. So we're going to start with a macro view of the district. This is kind of over the last 15, 17 years. And this is probably one of the most powerful charts you're going to see, okay, in the report. This is Union County single-family building permits, 16 years, okay? Running about 2,500, and then here's the subprime, kicks it up above 3,000, and then there's the bill of the collapse. It drops all the way down to 200, okay, 500, pardon me. And then it starts creeping back up. So if you just look at the last 5, 6, 7 years, it looks like you've had pretty sustained growth. You're basically coming off the floor of the subprime collapse. What happened is you had all of these households district over a relatively short period of time, about 7 years, okay? Most of them brought with them preschool-age children, elementary-age children, a lot of them into the west side of the district, some to the north, some scattered other places. But this huge wave of people moved into the district, okay, bringing their children with them. And consequently, you had your explosive enrollment growth you saw the last decade. To graphically show this, we have the Union County population pyramid. Now, again, real quickly, this is a graphic representation of your population by age, 0 to 4 to 85 plus by male and female. 0 to 4 is your preschool, that's your elementary, middle, high school. 20 to 34 is your, we call it family formation ages. That's where about 8% of all births take place. 35 to 54 is where most households have school-age kids. 55 through 69, we call the empty nest households. And 70 and over is turnover. Now, this is from the 2000 census, this is the starting point for this. After 10 years, or at least 7 years of really strong housing growth, this is what it looks like, okay? And this giant wave of people come out, bringing their school-age kids with them. But you'll notice there's a substantial dearth here, 20 to 34 age groups. That's why your 0 to 4 bar is so much shorter. They're outside of prime childbearing age. There's not that many people in prime childbearing age. And that kind of sets the stage for the next 10 years. As you go from 2010 to 2015, they age forward 5 years, you need to make up a couple thousand kids, preschoolers, to keep your enrollment constant. And it's not by birth, it's going to be through in-migration. As we have seen on the first slide, your building permits, your building construction over the last 6 years, whereas stronger than it was in 2010, is vastly smaller than it was in the early part of the decade. That wave is aging through. And that original wave that moved out between 2000 and 2007 may still have, but they're middle schoolers and they're high schoolers. And those households probably don't have very many elementary or preschool age kids in them. Now, this trend varies from attendance area to attendance area. I want to show quickly 3 examples. Okay, this is the Weddington area, and this is the current 2014 boundaries for the 2010 census. And again, the classic suburban pattern, very few people in their 20s and 30s, homeowners with their children, and a deficit. 10 years later, this is Weddington. All that building that went in there, these people moved out, brought their children with them, but there's still very few people in prime childbearing age. And there's a very noticeable deficit in the 0 to 4, which means anybody moving in, you would see a precipitous drop in the elementary enrollment because they're not there. That's always been a problem when school districts look at an area and they see new building going on. They want to add it to what they already have in enrollment, not realizing the preschool age cohorts coming up behind it are significantly smaller. Another example here is New Salem. Again, you don't have that wide difference in the ages, a small bubble here at the 30s, but you don't see a big deficit either. It's pretty, almost a pillar. And that's 2000. 2010, you see some growth, a little bit more in the suburban area, but they still have a relatively high proportion of people in their 20s, consequently a much smaller deficit, okay? And third example I have is East. And I picked East because East has the highest proportion of rental units of all the attendance areas in the district. And again, this is 2000, okay? And because you have so many people in prime childbearing age, you don't have a deficit, you have a surplus. I think it's about the only attendance area in the district that has this situation. And then 2010, a little bigger, there was some building in the area, but again, that same age distribution. The type of house, owner versus renter, the price of the house, the age when people move in, dictate the age structure of an area, okay? And that pattern rarely changes. It takes a lot to change the age distribution pattern of any attendance area. Okay. Another additional piece of information that we have is this is the Internal Revenue Service migration data, okay? This is for the year 2010. And the Census Bureau will, what they do is they take households, which is returns, persons, which is exemptions, and then we can calculate persons per household and median income. These are the households moving in. These are the households, people moving out. Now, if it's more than 20 households, they'll tell you what county they come from. And the reason, these are the top 5, and that goes back to what we've been saying for years, most of the in-migration and out-migration out of the Union County is from areas within 100 miles. Yes, there are some people moving down from the north and all that, but the vast majority is with counties within 100 miles of course, not surprisingly, the big sender is Mecklenburg. And for this year, 14 to 15, almost 1,700 households, over 3,700 people. And the outflow is about 1,400 households, 2,600 people. These tend to be new households coming in. These tend to be younger households moving out, their kids going to college. But Lancaster, Anson, York, and Caravas are the other big prime feeders. If you look at it historically, this is the in-migration flow per year, about 1,200, 14, 13, drops down to about 10. But here's the out-migration flow. And you calculate the net. The net is 2,000 up to 4,000, back down to 2,000. If we do this data back to 2000, the year 2000, you'd see a pattern here that looked a lot like building permit data. A huge spike between 2002, 2007, and then dropping off precipitously during the housing bust, and it has come back up again. So again, you've got this wave that's going through, okay? And the vast majority of those households that moved out 10, 15 years ago, and I can't emphasize this point enough, if they have kids in school, they're probably middle and high schoolers. And they probably don't have that many elementary and preschool kids in them. When we did the forecast, we again did assumptions and parameters. I want to go through real quickly the three most important ones. And the first one is B, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate stays below 5%. The district is dependent upon in-migration of young households, bringing their children with them or having them after they get here to maintain your enrollment. If no one moved into the district and you were just left to your own demographic devices, your elementary enrollment would drop by about almost 2,000 students in the next 10 years. There's just not enough births in the district to maintain your enrollment at current level. If you can't get a mortgage, you can't buy a house, okay? Now this is a tipping point. If it goes to 5.1, 5.2, stays there a couple of months, drops back down, it's a slight drag. If it goes to 6 or 7%, it's going to have a real detrimental impact on the in-migration flow. These kids today need to get a mortgage. So 5% is a very key point on that. The second one is the unemployment rate, Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, stays below 6.5%. Again, don't have a job, can't buy a house, okay? And we use the Charlotte metropolitan area because a large proportion of people who live in Union County work in Mecklenburg, so it's more of a regional aspect of it. And last but certainly not least, the housing turnover rate at least current levels, and the majority of the existing home sales are made by people over the age of 60. You'll see a slight uptick at 62, another one at 65. Most people don't downsize till they're in their 70s, and the primary event that leads them to downsize is not retirement, it's the death of one of the spouses. So, and oops, too far. Come on, back up. There we go. These are the actual enrollment forecasts, okay? Now I want to draw your attention to two things here. One, the total enrollment for the district drops over the next 10 years. Why does it drop? Because you have very, very large 12th grade classes graduating out. That wave of people that came out 10, 15 years ago and their subsequent children are now graduating through high school. And you have relatively small cohorts coming in, 27, 26, 2,500 versus 3,032 going out. Again, here the analogy I use is a bucket of water. If I have a bucket of water, I'm pouring water in the top, and there's a hole in the bottom. As long as I'm pouring in faster than it's going out the bottom, but if the hole in the bottom gets bigger, and it's now going out faster than I'm pouring it in, level will drop. This is what's happening. The hole in the bottom of the bucket is getting bigger. Look back over the last 6 years. You average about 2,700 12th grade graduating seniors. Over the next at least 8 years, you're going to average about 3,200. That's 500 more students per year you have to make up for. So the wave is going through. You'll notice that the district's high school enrollment peaks next year. That's when the peak of that wave of kids that moved out with their parents, back mid last decade is going to start graduating out. And you're going to start seeing some smaller 9th grade cohorts going through. So you're seeing the backside of that wave. That's why you're seeing this subsequent drop in enrollment. The wave is going through, all right? Now, this is at the district level. Each attendance area for elementary, each cluster for middle and high school had its own unique demographic trends, depending on how much building they got 10, 15 years ago, the age structure of the parents that moved in, when they moved in, where they were in the life course. There's a lot of factors in here. And I'm going to show, and I'll be the first to admit this, this is the extreme example. The extreme example is the Marvin Ridge cluster, okay? You can see somewhat going through here where the total here. That 424 drop here in 2014-15, that's looking at the impact of the redistricting, okay? But you can see where, particularly at the high school level, it keeps going up to 1,600. It starts dropping off. And then after 2021, 22, it starts dropping off a lot. And the reason for that is there's so many kids graduating out, and the cohorts coming in behind are a lot smaller. And you can see it in the middle school numbers too. Goes up to about a 1185 peak. And then when you start seeing these 400 to 360 cohorts going out, it drops off. The elementary has been dropping off for the last 6 years. This has been a challenge out there. The other aspect about Marvin Ridge is there's not that much area out there left to build on. You know, so if you do see some, and there are some households going up in the cluster, the problem is that you would need about 500 per year. This is where existing home turnover becomes your key variable. As long as these empty nesters stay in their households, there'll be no more new young children moving in. Move out, you know, in their early 50s, mid 50s and all that, some at 62, 65, but the bulk of them won't move out till after 70. So these households that have been producing school-age children for the last 15, 20 years, in many cases, will not produce any school children of any type for the next 15 or 20 years until the people move out, okay? You know, why would they want to? It's their home, it's their community. A lot of people like living there, so why would they move? So the question is there enough new home or new households moving in, either new and existing homes, to make up for this very large cohort wave going out? In the West, not enough. Okay, there's a couple of exceptions, and we can look at that later. Someone on the north. Now, I should, at this juncture, before I wrap up, say there's one key point here. Another factor for the decline is also the charter schools coming online. What is not in these forecasts, because we just got word on a couple of weeks ago, the newly approved charter school in Monroe and the newly approved charter high school that's going to go up in the Sun Valley area. Those are not in the forecast. So we need to get more specification on timelines, when they're going to come online, where they're going to be, when are they going to add grades. Now, the grade progression addition to the existing charter schools is in there, but those two new ones we do not have in there, and will not until we get more detailed specifications on it. Do we do questions now? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, other slides. Yeah, these are the actual total enrollment by grade, not by grade, but by total for each one of the schools. And you can see, let me pick out a couple of examples here. We'll take Rayview, my favorite, going off down in the 450s. And it's not because no one likes living there. They're all aging out. Their median age is well into their 40s, going into their 50s towards the end of the forecast series. Whereas on the other side of the coin, someplace like, where's Porter? Popham Porter, you know, basically holds its own because they do have enough new home construction, housing turnover. Another one keyed on is Kensington. I'm at a tough angle here, excuse me. Okay, Kensington's probably one of the few in the West End that has enough new home construction. And the reason for that is all of Millbridge goes into Kensington. And that's a good example to use because it would take new home construction to that magnitude just to break even. Okay, forget growing, just to make up for that large deficit in the area of the aging population. So unless you've got a Millbridge going on somewhere in each one of those Western attendance areas, that's why you see the downward slope on that. And then for the middle schools and high schools, basically you're seeing the impact of the relative size of the cohorts aging through each one of their clusters. And that had large amounts of new home construction in 2000 to 2007 are the ones seeing the high peaks right now. And they will begin to empty nest out and see their middle school and high school enrollments start. Middle school probably already. High schools will really start dropping off after 2018, 2019. I was told to get this done in 15 minutes, and I actually did. So
I have a question.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
know a lot of people just driving around the county think that we have a lot of growth in the county, from Waxhaw to Indian Trail and other areas of the county. What would you say to them as to why you're not really seeing that in the enrollment forecast? Except like you just talked about with Kensington and Rayview and Kensington and Millbridge.
And the pop pyramid tells it all right here. Again, you've got this huge deficit in the 0 to 4. You go 4, and it exists today too. Your age structure is a lot like this shape. Without those new households moving in or being built, it drops. Okay. Right now, you don't have enough new home construction to make up for these deficits. So, and again, on the west end, the only one right now that does is Kensington, because it has a huge, we're talking 12 to 2,000, depending on who you talk to, unit housing addition going in all in one area, So, and again, each area has its own unique characteristics. Look at the size of this deficit in Weddington. And look at the size of the deficit already existing middle school going to high school. They're aging through the system. Why? Because most of the homeowners out there now are in their 50s. They're not going to start downsizing for probably 10, 15, 20 years. So as long as they stay put, those households will not be putting anything in the school system. Okay.
I have a question. Does this include the apartments in Waxhaw? I know you got the permits that includes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I had a question. Am I safe to assume this uses the historical boundaries, and then redistricting happened that uses the current boundaries
I'm
going
sorry,
forward? The forecast, does it use the historical boundaries?
No, these are all 2014 boundaries.
Even
Your
previously,
currently used boundaries.
even previously from 2013, 2014, those years? Did it use the old boundaries, or does it use the new boundaries?
Just using the new boundaries.
All currently?
Yeah,
Okay.
all the current 2014 boundaries.
So if you go back to 2011, 12, would
Yeah.
that be the boundaries in existence in 11 and 12?
For your enrollment,
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
that's why you
Yes.
see that big 400 drop, because that's the end.
That's why you see the drop.
Okay. So
And
That way
That's
we can measure then the exact impact on the enrollment of what the boundary modification did. Like when we look at the Marvin Ridge area, okay, it dropped that area 400 students. And we see where it's middle school. Actually, it was more elementary and middle, had very little effect on the high schools. So we're trying to gauge what was the impact of that. Now, for the census data, we took the current 2014 boundaries and superimposed that on 2000 census geography. So we're looking at what did this area look like now in the 2014 boundaries in 2000.
So piggybacking on Mr. Helms, so all of these in green are actuals. They were our actual school numbers on.
Right. That's your
Okay.
historical.
And
The
the
blue are
blues
the blue are
forecast.
forecasts. Yeah.
and one more question too. Are people today having more kids, or is it steady?
Drop. Well, actually, the fertility rates in the U.S. have stayed pretty much in a 10% band over the last 40 years, somewhere between 1.8 and 2.0. But that brings up a good point. That's lifetime fertility for a woman. There's also there's total fertility rate. There's also a resident fertility rate. How many kids they have when they move out here and once they're living here. So given your age structure like this, most of the people here probably done having kids. There might be a few, but there's not that many. Most birth activity in these age groups. So the woman may have had 2 children in her lifetime, her TFR would be 2. But if she had them before she moved into the district, they count as migrants coming in. Her resident fertility rate more than likely is 0 if she's in her 40s. So you have to be real careful on fertility rates. But as a rule, fertility rates in the country really haven't changed that much. So when you see changes in year-to-year number of births and fertility rates, it's due to change the number of women in prime childbearing age.
So with the bypass coming, do you see growth on the eastern side of the county?
Which side?
So with the bypass expected to be finished in 2020, do you see growth on the eastern side of the county?
Not that much, no.
Okay.
You will see there's, again, it really depends on how many people are in turnover ages. They're not going to be building that much out there. Water and sewer constraints are one of the big problems. And again, migration and growth kind of flows like water. It'll come down the bypass first. So it'll fill in more of the northern and western, northwest part of the district and come down there. This is a 10-year scope. After 2026, it may get out that far, but it's going to take a while for it to get out there. New households moving in down there will be going into existing households.
So is it safe to say there will not be an influx of elementary students?
Not that big, no. It's
Okay.
It's that whole pot coming in, pot coming out kind of thing.
Right,
Too,
yeah.
that's balancing it out.
Well, the other fact you have to take a look in here too is population change and enrollment change, which traditionally has been very, very strong in Union County schools over the last, at least up until about 2015. It would be about 90% of the explained variance. The problem is now is that correlation is diverging. Your population change and your enrollment change are not. And the reason for that, the big reason, is charters.
That's the difference between your 15 enrollment forecast and the one today. That's
we
the
had the
number
charters
one
in the old one. And then again, that's the big reason why I caution on if the new Monroe charter and the charter high school come online and they have capacities of say 800 or 400 apiece, that's 800 kids you just take right off the top right there. Now, where you take them off, that becomes more of a research issue. Like right now, the 2 new charters that came online last couple of years, the vast majority of the students came out of the Sun Valley and Port Ridge areas. So that's why you're seeing the big, and we saw that in your enrollment numbers. We see the Levitan, we see the population numbers because there was no demographic change in those areas that correspond to kind of drop in enrollment. If you see, 150 kids disappear one year out of an attendance area, you would expect a whole bunch of homes to go on sale or something like that. Didn't happen. There's no correlation to it. So we're trying to isolate the impact of the charters.
Can you help me understand? So I'm looking at 2010 census numbers here.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're 7 years past that.
Right.
So a couple bands have probably moved up.
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like now? Do those bottom 2 bands look very similar to what you have here? And then how do you use that to forecast?
In 2015, we did 2015 pyramid. This band is now 5 to 9. It's not quite as big. The now current 0 to 4 band is not quite this big either. What's happened is everybody's aged. These bands are almost the same size. They're just 5, 7 years older. These kids are pretty much all going off to college, okay? These are now up in the high school, and this band is shrinking also because they're graduating, going away, okay? Band's probably a little bit bigger because you had some people moving in with late elementary age kids. But the problem remains is you don't have hardly any people 20 to 34 years old. These current bands in 2015 or 17 are probably this big, okay? There are very few people in Weddington of prime childbearing age. So if they're bringing their kids with them, they're not having births while they're living in the area. Very, very few people, drop $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 on a new house and say, hey, I'm having another kid. It just doesn't work that way. Some might. There's probably a handful, but not many that I know. So Weddington's a classic area, given this age distribution, where you need more households coming in, bringing both preschool and elementary age kids just to break even. And, you know, the point we brought up earlier, it befuddles people. You see all these households moving in, you see things being built. Why is our enrollment not growing? Well, this is why. Because you can't add it to what you already have. You have to take into effect that, like in Weddington, I mean, just in 2010, Weddington would have need to had, oh God, almost 800 kids moving, or that would be birth cohorts of 06 to 10, move in just to break even. There wasn't enough land out there, wasn't enough houses being built to do that.
So the new neighborhoods going in, obviously middle-aged folks, I guess, with like, do we know what that demographic looks like? The people that are buying the $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 homes?
The vast majority of them are between the ages of 35 and 45 years old and have children with them. Most of them, not all of them, have probably completed their household size is now set.
So they're bringing children in.
Yeah, they're bringing children with them, and that's what's keeping the enrollment from dropping off any further. They are bringing in kids. Without them, you'd be rolling off the table.
So that's maintaining it with everybody staying put.
Not even maintaining it. It's cutting into that deficit, but not eliminating it. And this situation can be generalized to Antioch, Marvin, Sandy Ridge, Newtown, any of the areas that had that large wave of people move in 10 years ago that now have most of them middle school, high school, or empty nested already and don't have any more preschoolers or elementary age kids coming in. They're trying to make up for that large flow. That's why Rayview has been dropping so much for the last 5 years, is they're just empty nesting out. And I use Rayview as an example, not because I'm picking on them. Rayview's boundaries weren't changed in the last redistricting. So you've got a consistent pattern there. I can go back there 5, 6, 7 years and see what it has done. Plus with the earlier forecast series too, it's been tracking pretty much on. It's not that people are leaving in droves, they're just getting older. That's all there is to it.
Dr. McKibben, back in the go-go days, the county and the school system embarked upon a land banking program.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if this documentation has been supplied to you or maps where the properties are located, but there's a plot of land, I think it's about 35 acres up in the Weddington area,
Mm-hmm.
A very large parcel in the Indian Trail, Fairview, Stallings, northern area.
Yep.
That a high school and middle school were planned.
Mm-hmm.
Another
that, yeah.
down in the Parkwood area, Monroe. So you're familiar with that.
Oh yeah.
Estimation, is there any guidance you could give us that in the foreseeable future of your projections, will additional school construction be necessary on those parcels, or are those potentially surplus?
Surplus.
I'm sorry?
Surplus. I don't want to steal any Matt Cropper's thunder, so I'll just give you a one-word answer. So he'll address that in more detail.
And if we do surplus that, will that take into account selling it and possibly houses get put on that?
Can I answer that? Okay. Well, I work for you. Go back to my fundamental statement on this. I tell this to all school districts. Your demographic trends I'm showing here are fluid. They're going to change. There are different aspects of life course, different parts of the county. It's always changing. Your buildings are static, okay? You can't move them. You're stuck with them for 50, 60, 70 years, okay? Your problem is you've got buildings where you don't have kids, and you've got kids where you don't have buildings, okay? Now, there's two ways to resolve that problem. You either do a massive boundary modification, or you close down old buildings that are too expensive to renovate and you build new ones where you need them. So you might want to hang on to the land to put a new one there, but I would have to say, in my professional opinion, if you build anything, you close something down at the same time. Because you've got this, again, this giant wave of kids going through the system that are now in middle and high schools.
I'm sorry, did you say you might recommend holding on, if any, one, which one did you refer to?
Well, anything that's in high building areas, like along the bypass, probably good to hang on to. Or any place where you might think about, taking an older building offline and replacing it with a newer one in a slightly different area. When we get into the maps, we can show you some of the issues we come up with. Part of the problems about drawing your boundaries is the fact that a lot of your schools are built in the wrong place. So, and you're stuck with that. So now you have to work around it. So if you start planning in the future, that's what we advise school districts. Site selection is probably the most important thing you're going to do, because if for no other reason, you're stuck with it there for 50, 60, 70 years. And then what happens is they just throw them up in whatever place they want to put it for whatever reason. 20 years later, school boards like you are now charged with the task of trying to rectify this problem.
So to piggyback on this conversation and these questions, the community, the question that I often get is, we have this land in the Hemby Bridge area, which feeds into Porter Ridge Middle and Porter Ridge High School. And this is just one example of the land surplus. So we have this land called Middle School, High School D, where the community was expecting at the Hemby Bridge campus a middle school and a high school.
I remember that, yeah.
So the question that we're, constantly faced with, for this board and the process we're going through right now is, do we foresee with all the construction in the Porter Ridge area, will there ever be a need to build a Hemby Bridge middle school or a high school, which is referred to as middle school, high school D? Or, with the answer you just gave, if we were to build something, then we would have to close something down. But are you familiar with the land?
Oh, absolutely.
Out at high school, middle school?
The 2010 forecast series worked on that.
Okay. Do you anticipate that there would be a need for a middle school or a high school in that area?
Okay, let me do a two-part answer on that too. And I'm stealing the thunder on this. The high school enrollments and the middle school enrollments at Marvin Ridge, Weddington, and to a lesser extent, Cuthbertson, are going to drop precipitously over the next 10 years. Okay, Cuthbertson to a lesser extent because of Millbridge. All right. To keep them at a reasonable operational capacity, you will need to drive your boundaries to the east, okay, to keep them full. By doing that, you take territory away from primarily Sun Valley, okay? So if you're doing that and you're trying to make your distribution of students match your distribution of buildings, you're taking more territory away. You probably don't need a building there because you're going to try to keep the other ones full since you can't move them, okay? It would be kind of ludicrous to build something new on the Hembley campus and close down Marvin Ridge, a perfectly good school. Why close it down, So you want to keep it occupied and use the facility for at least 20, 30, 40 more years. So basically you're dealing with a geographic and a demographic question of where your students are distributed, plus the distribution of your buildings, okay? So given these trends, which we know are coming, that area probably is not going to need a new high school or middle school for that matter, okay? Now, and what could happen to change that? Well, have a whole bunch of new households move in the next 5 years with preschool and elementary age kids. Problem is, unless a whole bunch of existing homeowners sell and a whole bunch of new housing developers build out there, it won't be enough to take care of this wave or make up for this wave that's going through. Matt wanted to add something to that also.
Sure. What I would say is when you're looking at these questions, to trying to find answers for these questions. What we typically say is, before you start looking at capital improvements or adding facilities to the area, you first start looking at can you address imbalances in utilization through realignment of boundaries, which that's what we are in the process of doing right now. I would encourage you to process unfolds and see what kind of options are created from the committee, and see what the utilizations the resulting utilizations would be if a different boundary alternative were considered, and that can help shed some light on if there is a need for added capacity, or if there's not. What this doesn't address is the quality or the age of facilities and the quality of facilities. And I know that Himby Bridge is an older building and has the open design inside the building. And so that's a whole other discussion, whether it's the actual facility is something that you want to improve. But I think you're talking more, not elementary, but you're talking middle and high school. Just encourage you to look and see the results of some of the work that's going to be coming out as a result of the work with the committee, and see what the utilization will look like with different options as they're considered. And that is certainly, I think that will certainly shed some light on whether you feel it's pertinent to add more capacity in certain areas. We think that from what we've seen in the forecasts, in the forecasted change, and a lot of the forecast numbers going down, you do have some excess capacity in your, especially in the out years, you'll have some excess capacity in your upper grade schools. So that's certainly something to consider. If you're adding capacity, you also need to consider, do you take other capacity offline where it's pertinent or viable?
I think my question primarily was, we have this land surplus. And as we go through this process, do we continue holding on to this land, or do we allow it to be developed, or are we going to need it for schools?
Well,
That was my question also, Mrs. Merrill. Are we looking to liquidate this as a board? And what is Dr. McKibbin's recommendation for this?
Well, I'll agree with what Matthew says. I think this is something that needs to be discussed as we go through the process. I think it'd be premature at this time to come to any conclusions where we're just now pulling together the data, so as we're moving forward, if you do move your boundaries more aggressively to the east, in some areas, if you have surplus property there, you may not need it, and then could dispose of it in any way the board and public sees fit. But I think at this juncture, it needs to be something that looks at as we go through this entire process, and that you can come to a decision on that sometime in early 2018. But it's definitely something you want to keep an eye on, and now we're not looking at that while we're doing our boundary modification scenarios. But you may want to keep an eye on, as we're doing this, going, we may not need this. We may want to hang on to this. So it would be a discussion, I think, to keep in the back of your mind over the next 6 to 8 months.
Thank you.
So, any other questions? Matthew?
Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Houlihan, my name is Matthew Cropper. I'm with Cropper GIS, and I'm here tonight to give you a presentation on the capacity study that we just have recently completed, and then also talk a little bit about utilization, which is a good segue into from Dr. McKibbin's presentation. We met with, toured the buildings over this last summer. We were in the district and went through every single building in the county, and met with the principals and interviewed the principals and talked with them about how the buildings were being used. We wanted to understand some of the unique nuances of the buildings and where they may have special programs that are bringing students in from out of school, out of zone, and other unique nuances with the building. Understanding where choke points are with the building and where they might have bottlenecks, may it be the cafeteria or the hallways and things like that. And really, it's school principals are very resourceful, some of the most resourceful people that you will meet. If a school has extra space in it, they will spread out into that space and make use of all of the space they have available and in constructive ways. If they have no space and they're limited, they'll reclaim closets and other types of spaces for pull-out education and other types of instructional use. So the focus of this is and how they're using the buildings and where they may be spreading out and where they may actually need space. There were many schools that we walked through where they didn't have, they were using the portables that were on site for their resource instruction and things like that. We want to make sure that there's enough space in the bricks and mortar of the building factored into this capacity so that there's adequate space for the resource pull-out instruction and those types of things. And likewise, there were schools that have some extra space where they were say a full-size classroom is used for resource and pull-out, where there are other spaces inside the building that could be adequate for that use. And in those cases, those spaces were factored in as permanent capacity. We didn't factor in any portables in our capacity. It's all bricks and mortar in the permanent space under the roof. Looked at the actual specific class size guidelines for the district. We factored in House Bill 13, the changes that are upcoming for your K through third grade class sizes. We made some adjustments to class size for special programs such as language immersion. We reduced the class size for those to 19-1 because of the way that program and in order to not compromise the program. And then things like NACC, which are for profound disabilities, and there are other terms that are used at different grade levels for that type of student, and those class sizes were reduced to ratio. We also reduced class sizes for elementary schools that were designated as Title I, and we did give them a reduced factor for Title I. In addition to that, you do have some buildings in your district that have some uniquely or oddly shaped shapes of schools, of your classrooms. For instance, Sun Valley Middle, and there's two other schools that have more of a pie shape type of configuration in the class. And those were ones that we had considered categorized as undersized to give them a reduced factor, because they're really they're uniquely shaped, and they really couldn't accommodate a full-sized class. For elementary schools, rooms such as music, art, and library and computer labs were not factored into the capacity, because those are rooms that are designated for special use, and kids go to those and then they go back to their classroom. And then pull-out and resource rooms were also not factored into the capacity. For middle and high schools, computer labs and music and art were factored into the capacity because of how education is delivered. At those grade levels, the students travel to the classroom at middle and high, versus at elementary, they stay in the classroom. They stay in their one classroom. So computer labs, music and art were factored. Band and choir rooms were not included in the capacity numbers that I have put together, just because they are uniquely designed for that specific use. They'll have tiered steps and other types of specific designs for those types of uses that wouldn't be suitable for a regular or standard type classroom setting. With the principals and toured all the buildings in the district, I itemized all of the rooms and counted the rooms. I applied that inventory, the room counts, to the class sizes that we have assumed for this district. Again, some of the special use rooms were not factored in the capacity. And And there were, as I mentioned, there were some cases where a school needed some extra space for a pullout because it was being portables. So in those cases to set an actual standard classroom aside for that type of use to make sure that that school had it. And all of those things are noted in, I have detailed notes for each school on some of the assumptions I made and where I kind of deviated away from just a raw inventory of classrooms. This is these are the capacities that I have built. The high school ones aren't showing up on here. It looks like I'm not sure if maybe we could put the PDF up on here. I think that the high school capacities are shown in black here. But the elementary, you can see the elementary capacities are listed as a result of the study. Then we have middle school capacities. And then I think in your PowerPoint and the presentation that you have in front of you, you see that what the high school capacities are for the different schools. One note to make with the high school is figure for CATA for CATA here on this property. But the program at CATA limits the capacity of that building to the enrollment to 850 students. That was something that was notable through conversations with the principal.
Let me ask you something here.
Yes, sir.
Are we, besides just it was set up for 800 and we're not limited to that. Couldn't we expand that?
That is really a decision that's up to the school district.
That's right.
Yes,
What I'm saying, that number is not cast in stone.
I think that is the capacity that's the enrollment, the design for the program at that school. So we have, I have calculated a capacity for CATA, which is higher than the capacity of 850. And I think that it would have to be a discussion with the educators at that school to determine if what the program needs are in terms of whether they can expand that. But the capacity that I had calculated for CATA is higher than the enrollment of 850.
But my understanding is what that doesn't take into account is, let's say there's a robotics classroom in CATA and it has 20 stations set up in the classroom for robotics, and that's all that fits in there. That doesn't take that into account. This is strictly a capacity discussion, correct?
That's true, but some of the CTE classes are running at low numbers.
Right. No, I understand what you're saying.
And what I was give flexibility back to the high schools for some of those children to come to CATA on a half-day basis like the old Career Center process did. We could utilize more of that space without actually putting a cramp on, as Ms. Hontel said, the engineering classroom.
I did use the NCDPI middle and high school class size guidelines. I used a 26:1 for middle and 28:1 for high school. And so I think you'd have to determine, as Ms. Heintel said, whether the program is suitable for that number of students in some of those specialized programs that they offer. But
I know that, and they've repeated this. It's a conversation we're certainly open to having with the board, and staff needs to take a little bit of a deeper dive into it. I think it would really come down to programmatic changes. And when you look at things, Mr. Cropper had said that, one of the big issues that you have at CATA is their labs. They have so many specialized classrooms, like laboratories, that are not taken into account in this study. And so, we're open to looking at how the program has been designed for fall of 18. More work on it for sure.
What if I understand what you're saying correctly is, in doing your calculation, you're treating, as far as capacity goes, you're treating CATA like any other high school, but because of the special programming and the needs for additional space, the way it's set up right now is not practical to utilize that maximum capacity that you've calculated. Is that
Yes,
basically in a nutshell?
yes, sir. The CATA was calculated like every other school in terms of the number of general standard size classrooms that exist in that building, and then factored in the number of students, the class size, student per teacher ratio in that, so that there certainly are some programmatic things that are unique to that school and the program that it offers that may, the number of students that could, each classroom being at 28 to 1 per se.
I have a question too. It's really more towards Dr. Houlihan. Are computer labs really needed anymore in high schools?
The only reason I would say yes is because you have some programs that are offered that on your standard laptop, you can't have software that will be operational. I know in a lot of our engineering classes, the type of applications that are used and software that are used require specialized software that your general can't handle. That would be the only reason why, particularly from a CTE standpoint. When you look at, I remember going to Piedmont High School and looking at one of their CTE courses on interior design and architecture. They have very specialized software that you have to have a desktop monitor to support that. It's just not configured. That would be the only reason why, I would say.
We have students, whether it's block 1, 2, 3, or 4, throughout their school day, they may go to the computer lab for that particular block to take a class online that may not be offered at that high school, but they have staff in the computer lab for those students that need to go there during that period to take their own online class.
So with once you have capacity numbers, the next step that we do is we start to look at the utilization and how, and so what I've done is I've put together something that looks at a utilization forecast, which takes Dr. McKibben's numbers, his forecasted numbers, and compares that to the capacity, and not only looks at what the utilization is of the buildings now, but the utilizations through the life of his forecast. We applied a color scale to the table so that you could get a more visual perspective of where there may be overcrowding and underutilization. I have the lower side below 75% utilization is shown in blue, and then you have green at 75 to 90, which is really the sweet spot for utilization of the schools. Then you get 90 to 100, which is in yellow, and then over 100 is in red. To understand how buildings are being utilized and how they compare to each other. So this is a graphic of the elementary schools where we could see how the elementary schools differ and where you see overcrowding in certain places historically and into the current and into the future. You can see that, for instance, New Salem is over capacity and has been through the window that we've been looking at. And some schools are, they go up in the green, they stay in the green. Some of them get up into the green and then they end up in the blue in the out years. And some of them are in sort of in the blue from currently and also through the life of the forecast. So this is something that I and Dr. McKibben and also the committee, the realignment committee, will be looking at to understand what not only the current utilization is of buildings, but what is anticipated in the out years of the forecast. We also have this for middle and high school, and this shows you the middle and high school utilization, the forecast, and you can see that in the bottom line shows you the total. So you have your total utilization, and this really gives us a target for when we start getting into realignment. Could the target utilization rate be for schools in order to make sure that they're equitable when we start looking at realignment? So right now, you're at your high schools, I think you're operating around 83%, somewhere 83%. So, so that's really I would say a soft target for what, when we start looking at realignment options, we want to make sure that things are equitable, and that the first step is to try to get things to get close to that. And then, but if there is an area where there's a lot of forecast decline, you may start to see things, options may start to get developed that utilize that building a little more, knowing that there's some anticipated enrollment decline that's forecasted in the out years. But that's really the next steps in this part of the process, and some of the results, some of the work that'll be done with the realignment committee. But this is going to be a piece of data that will be used and shared with the committee as they continue to evaluate the zones in this district.
Since we're looking at the middle school and high schools, now might be a good time to clarify or make sure that the bond projects, when you calculated these capacities, does this include already have the additions assumed in these numbers, or is this the current capacity? Just clarify if this is with or without the bond additions.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate you bringing that up. And the capacity numbers do factor in the additions that are planned at the various schools per the bond. So they are factored into these numbers, the additions. That's correct. And so with that is all I have, unless anybody has any other questions for me.
The numbers that you have also do not include the mobile units that would be currently in use at each of the schools that have them, correct?
That is correct.
This is strictly brick and mortar.
Brick and mortar, mobile units are not factored into the capacity.
Where do cafeteria sizes fit into this?
Well, the cafeterias, in talking with the principals, I had noted in some of the things as I mentioned earlier, I talked to the principal. Where are your choke points? Where do you have any crowded cafeterias or corridors and things like that? And if the principal noted to me that the cafeteria was full, or they had an undersized cafeteria, or if I had just observed it through my walkthrough, I noted it in some of the notes. Some of the planned additions that are being planned per the bond also include some expansions to cafeterias in some spaces, and that was factored in. But this is classroom capacity, and it's not the core capacity. So there may be some limitations to a building in its core, and that's something as we can start to look at buildings and how it relates to boundaries and zones, that conversation is likely going to come up with the committee, and certainly information that we can be shared with the board. But we will be collecting some information from the district on core capacities of the buildings, so that we can have another and be able to look at it from that angle as well.
I don't understand the rationale why the core capacity wouldn't be more important or relevant to this than the actual seating capacity. Could you walk me through that?
If I had, in walking through the buildings, if I had identified a big difference between classroom capacity and core capacity, I made note of it in my notes in the study. Two cases where I had seen some differences where the cafeteria was small and undersized, but I think it's just something that we're looking at the classroom capacity, and for the most part, I feel that the classroom capacity can accommodate the core can accommodate the classroom, but I think it's something that we just have to evaluate when we get some data from the district as we work through the realignment and looking at making adjustments to zones to make sure that that we're not staying within the guidelines of a classroom capacity, but overloading the core. And I think that we will collect some data from the district and provide that to the committee to make sure that they are aware of that factor, that potential issue as well.
I would also say with House Bill 13 being on the horizon, having classroom capacity is really important on whether we're going to meet that legislation or not meet that legislation. So that's why, I tend to agree with having a primary focus on a classroom capacity and making sure that our numbers are, solid. If that does get enacted, this time next year. Mhm. And I want to commend you for walking all 53 schools and getting this data for us.
It was a great, I had a great time. It was rigorous, but all of the staff at your schools were very helpful. I had no issues with any of the buildings, and they were more than helpful, and certainly helped make the process easier.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Should we talk about a motion? Capacity has been set by the school board with help from Mr. Cropper and Dr. McKibben, as well as staff. And I guess we need to decide if these capacities are the ones we want to go with so that the committee can use it for the realignment process. I think that the numbers have been vetted by staff as well as by the board now after Mr. Cropper walked each and every school. So that there is one particular issue with respect to capacity. Porter Ridge Middle School bond will be above the 1,600 policy number. So I don't know if this is what we can do. I think we should make an exception to that for this purpose, or what do you think we should do to accommodate that with respect to policy?
We can bring up the next policy committee meeting. We can bring up the next policy committee and propose a revision to that policy.
Okay.
Probably the cleanest thing to do.
Okay. So I would move that we approve the capacity numbers as outlined in this report.
I'll second.
Classroom capacity numbers.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you. Okay, and we do not have any closed session decisions tonight, and that brings us to adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
I second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.